Hi everyone, welcome to quarantine week 5607. Things are getting ridiculous around here. But I am here to talk to you about homeschooling, especially since so many of you are home now doing school, not necessarily in the traditional homeschool sense, in your own distance learning way, however the teachers at your kids' school have laid it out, or if you have decided to pull your kids out and just be home with them for this time during quarantine, or maybe forever. I am a homeschool mom of 3 kids. My name is Sara. My kids' names are Peyton, Carter, and Wesley. Peyton is my oldest. She's 9. Carter is 8, and Wesley is 6. It's a little bit wild with 3. But lots of fun. My husband is in the film industry and in themed entertainment, so we travel constantly. We literally had to drive back in the middle of this pandemic from Detroit because he was working on a museum there. And driving across the country with 3 kids, entering gas stations and hotels and trying to keep them from touching things was not an easy task. But we are home now, and I'm very glad to be home and glad to have this opportunity to talk to you all about what it's like to homeschool, the good stuff, some tips and tricks that can help you work with your kids and not make it a hair-pulling experience. So we chose to homeschool about 3 years ago. We were in the middle of adopting our youngest, and we knew we were going to go live in South Korea while we waited for the process to be finalized. So we knew we were going to be traveling for at least 2 months, if not more. So it was kind of a good time for us to just pull them out and see how it went with having them at home before we decided to travel to Korea. So we pulled them out, and the first thing I did was nothing with them. For almost an entire month, we did no workbooks, we did no worksheets, we didn't try to learn a thing, we just played. They played, they would play Legos, they would play pretend, they would dress up, coloring. It was kind of like a summer break in the middle of the fall. It was really healing, I think, for them to be able to decompress from the expectations, because homeschool life is very different than traditional school life. Homeschool life is filled with lots more time for recess and creative play and thought and writing and dancing and drawing and whatever kinds of things your kiddos are interested in. So part of the perk for us for homeschooling is just our quality of life. We love taking it easy in the mornings, not racing to get out the door, not having to pack lunches is a huge perk for me. I also don't like to have a set schedule where I have to do the same thing at the same time every single day. I realize that that's weird and some people need that kind of schedule, but for me it's a perk to not have to get up and race out the door to get them to school. We start school in the mornings kind of whenever we're all awake, and it's kind of relaxing, and it's a nice pace of life for us. We get to do lots of road trips. We do lots of education on the road at national parks or weird sites like the world's biggest ball of yarn or the alien jerky places outside of Vegas. The kids have seen lots of things. I believe they've been to about 40 states each, and one of them has only lived in this country for the last year and a half. So they've had a very interesting life homeschooling. But not everybody can do that, and I understand that. But it is a perk to get to travel, to get to go on a quick little vacation in the middle of the week because you don't have to worry about a school schedule. It's very freeing. Sorry about that. Brief interruption thanks to all the children running around the house today. So travel is great. It's one of my favorite things about homeschooling, but one of my other favorite things is the joy they find in learning things that they're interested in. My middle son is obsessed with ancient Egyptian history. I mean obsessed. He could tell you anything about any of the gods, the burial rituals, King Tut, everything. He is like a walking encyclopedia for ancient Egyptian history. It's hilarious. And it's great because he's learning history when he's just looking at things for fun. So it's fantastic for him to get to pursue that on a deeper level than he would if it were just a short little history unit in a traditional classroom. On top of that, he also has dyslexia and visual processing disorder. So reading has been a bear for him. It's been very difficult, and he's had to work really hard at it. And it's been great because we're home together, we can practice reading more together, and because we're a part of a charter school, he has an IEP, he has teachers he meets with via Zoom, and has since this past fall, and they have helped him work through all of the visual processing issues that he's had that I couldn't help him with, because I'm not a trained educator. That's not what my background is in. And so they've been able to work with him and help him in ways that I never could have. So seeing his growth has been amazing. He is great at understanding things when you tell it to him, but reading it, he can't handle it. My youngest and my oldest, they can do things audibly, but they're much, much better if they can look at it, watch it, read it, that kind of thing. So it's been really great to see how each kid learns so differently. So one of the things that is my favorite part of homeschooling, and something that we use every single day, even on weekends, it's a constant conversation in our house, is storytelling. We love stories because my husband's in the film industry. He obviously is a big movie fan. I read probably 100 books a year. I'm a huge reader. I love it so much. And I'm hoping to raise kids who are readers or storytellers or kids who can relate to story. So one of the reasons why Victoria asked me to talk with you all was because I did a whole series. It's not finished, I need to finish it, but a whole series on my Instagram on life lessons from Harry Potter, because I am a huge nerd and love, love, love Harry Potter. And I think that series like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, Star Wars, these fantasy series have fantastic points of view for our kids to learn about heroes and villains and good and bad and evil, and great character qualities that they can grow and learn in as they become adults. We all relate to stories, all of us. Even people that don't like to read, you probably like to watch a movie or read a book or listen to an audible or a podcast. There are so many ways that we interact with stories on a daily basis. Even the news is giving us a story. We even tell ourselves a story. When we're in a disagreement with someone, we're telling ourselves a story about that disagreement. So storytelling is one of the most powerful tools we have to raise our kids to become productive, great members of society. One of the things that I love about stories like Harry Potter is that while we don't live in that world and we're not wizards and we don't have magic, there's still so many things about that story that are personal and that we can take to heart. Some of us were raised by parents that aren't our biological parents. Some of us are raising kids that aren't our biological kids. Some of us don't fit in with our own families or with our own schools or our peer group. Interruption number 2 has been completed. Where were we? Stories that are personal are often universal. When we tell our own personal story, it typically can relate to many, many people, especially the more specific and the more vulnerable we become. And I think that's what happens a lot with these stories, these fantasy stories, because we get to see these heroes and these villains in vulnerable states. And we can relate to those emotions and those fears and those decisions that they make in ways that aren't often seen in a lot of traditional movies, I think. One of my husband's favorite movies are Star Wars or the Marvel movies, and those are also great for this because there's heroes and villains, and there's a great theme running through all of it about good versus evil. But I really, really like it when the kids and I can discuss the concepts of humanity within these heroes and these villains. Because so often the heroes are capable of being villains just as the villains are capable of being heroes. And I love that the kids can start to see how one person is capable of the good or the bad, and how they can see that these heroes are not perfect human beings. They don't make every decision right. They don't do everything correctly. They make mistakes. They have flaws. They fail at things. And they get back up and they continue fighting for the good. And I love that the kids can see that, because that's something they can look up to and know is an attainable goal. I also love that we get to see the villains as humans, and we get to see that they do have strengths. They may use those strengths for evil or for bad, but they have strengths, and to acknowledge that is great. To acknowledge that these heroes have strengths that help guide them into their bullying practices is a great way to see the humanity in maybe our own kids' bullies. To be able to acknowledge the good in someone you really dislike humanizes them, and it kind of gives you a perspective that you wouldn't have if you only chose to be angry and bitter at them. There's a little spoiler alert coming, so if you haven't seen all of the Harry Potter movies or read all of the Harry Potter books, just plug your ears for a second. But it is important if you have. I'm sure you've noticed this and I'm sure you've thought about it, but it is something I can't wait to address with my kids once they've finished reading the books and watching the movies. The villain, Voldemort, well, he's one of the villains. There's many in Harry Potter. But we look at his early life and we see how the trauma in his early life led him on this path of bitterness and anger and deceit and control and a need for power. Many, many kids have trauma in their early life. And what they decide to do with it is kind of how they turn out, if they choose to go for the good or go for the evil. And I think it's interesting that we get to see very similar stories. Harry grows up very similarly with childhood traumas, unwanted, unloved, and uncared for. And he chose the good. But why was that? What caused that shift in him? Why didn't he live with bitterness and anger and greed? And in some ways he does. He does have that bitterness, and he just chooses to use it for the good for whatever reason. But it's great because our kids get to see that we have a choice in the matter. As humans, we get to choose whether we're going to be on the side of the good or the side of the evil. And I think it's a fantastic tool in stories to get to discuss that and put it into real life application for our kids. One of the other things I really appreciate about stories like this, when our kids have somebody who is a villain in their own personal life, and you can start to discuss with them how this person got to be the way that they are. And then maybe you can start to develop a little bit of empathy for that person. If they say, I hate so-and-so, you can discuss why. What do they hate about them? Well, they're mean. They push me a lot. They hit me a lot. Okay, why do you think they do that? And you start to go down the path with your children, discussing that some people might be insecure. They might be pushed around at home. They might just want control or power. They might be even scared. And they're choosing things that are going to lead to cause harm to our kids, but our kids can then turn and act in a way that can help take the power out of that bully's actions. There's this whole Instagram series I was telling you about that I did on life lessons in Harry Potter, and one of the things I talked about is how giving bullies power and letting them know that what they're doing is hurting you and upsetting you, and they're getting a reaction. I have this conversation with my kids all the time when they fight amongst each other. If you give a reaction to your older brother because he's irritating you, he's gonna keep doing it. It's just basic sibling rivalry. We all know this, especially if we grew up with a few siblings that are close in age. We're gonna fight, we're gonna disagree, and especially now in quarantine, the fire pressure is on. Like, we are all together all the time. There are no breaks. Believe me, this is not normal homeschool life. This is not normal life in any way, shape, or form. So we're all stuck together in this house, and the kids are gonna start bickering, and they're gonna start arguing, and taking stories like this and discussing how they can kind of let the wind out of this bully's sails helps a little bit. It helps give them tools to use how to combat difficult people, whether it's their brother, whether it's their own internal battle they're fighting. It's just great. The stories give us great tools to help our kids. One of the other things I really love is I didn't always fit in with my family. I wasn't terribly the odd one out, but there were some ways that I was a little bit the odd one out. And what I love about books like Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings is you can almost always find somebody that you relate to. You can almost always find a mentor or a leader in these characters that you can look to when you're frustrated or scared or feeling completely out of touch with the people that you're around. It's a fantastic way to remind ourselves that we aren't alone in the world and that being different and unique is acceptable, that it's perfectly wonderful to be different and unique. And I love that about these kinds of books. The last thing I'll talk about is that one of the things I talk to the kids a lot about is they are the ones that are writing their story. They are the author of their story. So while we can't control the circumstances that get thrown at us, we can't control that we're stuck at home right now. We can't control how long the coronavirus will stick around. We can't control when we'll get to go back out and be with our friends. But we can control ourselves, and we can get creative with it because we are the ones writing our own story. So today we talked about how we could cope with not being around our friends. That's the thing my kids are the most disheartened about, is not having play dates with our friends. We live our lives very socially. Most of our friends homeschool, so we get to spend lots of Tuesdays and Wednesdays in the mornings together, playing with friends or going to the museum. So I think later this afternoon, Carter's going to build a robot out of cardboard and tape his iPad to face out so he can FaceTime with his friend, and it's like his friend is here. He's building a friend-shaped robot. And I love that he's thinking of ways outside of the box to get to connect with his buddies, because it is really hard. It is really hard to be alone during these times. And when you have to connect virtually only, it's a difficult thing to manage. It's new to our kids. It's new to have to only communicate via FaceTime or Zoom. But getting to come up with new and unique ways for them to communicate with their friends is really powerful. And stories like this can help them get lost in another world where they don't feel so lonely. They don't feel so out of touch with their social circles and out of touch with their extracurricular activities. They can dive into a series like this right now and just fall in love with these characters. I think it's going to be a great time for us as people to jump into something that we would normally say we don't have time for that. Right now, all of my kids are listening to the Harry Potter audibles. We'll be watching the movies as they finish each audible, and it's been a great conversation starter for all of us. I absolutely love it. So later on, I'm gonna do a little activity for you and your kids, a little book report that you can do, and it can work for kids in kindergarten all the way up to high school age. I think book reports are seemingly boring, but they're a really great tool to get your kids talking, and they don't have to be such a boring activity. So later on, there'll be a printable you'll get, and then you can do this activity. So until then, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.